Have you ever wanted to know what the whitest cities in the United States are? If you said yes, today you're going to find out. 2 weeks ago, we did the whitest states in the US, followed a few days later by the blackest states, and I'm going to kind of give you the same intro as I did for those videos. Here it goes. A few months ago, I caved to public pressure. I usually avoid race-related videos, but I had so many requests for this one, I figured it was time to do it. People pointed out that it's not just racists that want to know the demographics of a location. People of different races want to know good places to live so they could kind of be amongst their own in some cases. You know, the same type of festivals, maybe the same churches, same foods they're accustomed to. When that was explained to me that way, it made sense, and a few months ago I made the most Asian states followed by the most Hispanic states. Today we do the whitest cities in the US, and in a week or so we'll do the blackest cities. Now there's some clarification I gotta give you. When I say white, I mean what the US Census considers only white. Yes, that is a category. There's other categories that include Hispanic whites, and that's usually things like Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Cuban Americans, Brazilian Americans, people that are 2 or 3 generations in the United States, their just heritage happens to come from Brazil, Mexico, Cuba, whatever. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Omaha, Nebraska. This shouldn't shock anyone at all. If you've ever been to Omaha, you kind of know. I mean, Omaha's in a state where you can get a hayride any time of the year. In the early days, the Omaha area was the home of the Pawnee and the Sioux Indians. And on July 21st, 1804, Lewis and Clark passed through this area and noted that the territory would be a good area to establish a trading post and possibly a fortified trading post. During the trek west, Mormons established the first non-native settlement in the region at what would become known as Cutler's Park. To give you an idea of the non-Hispanic white thing, if we were gauging that on this one and ranking it by that, they would be about 77% white with Hispanic. But the white only, Omaha, Nebraska is 66.8% white. Number 9, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Don't worry, this entire list just isn't Middle America. But Fort Wayne is definitely Middle America, and it is definitely white. The actual fort that was here, called Fort Wayne, was built in 1794 by the United States Army under the direction of American Revolutionary War General Anthony Wayne. So they decided to name the place after him. Years later, Fort Wayne became a main part of the Pennsylvania Railroad and soon became known as Altoona of the West. By the late 1800s, Fort Wayne had really started to grow, with the railroad dropping off European immigrants that were just pouring out of the East Coast. They're all looking for jobs. Back in the day, farms needed a lot of people. These days, 67.8% of the population of Fort Wayne, Indiana is white. Number 8, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Yeah, I could see this one. I'm not surprised about this one at all. Been years since I lived in Colorado Springs, but back 20 or so years ago, it was so white the number 1 condiment was mild salsa. And it really doesn't look like much has changed. 68.7% of Colorado Springs population is considered white. Number 7, Gilbert, Arizona. Another one that's not a shocker. In my experience, just about any city in Arizona wouldn't be a shocker if they showed up on this list. Every time I've been to Gilbert, Arizona, I get the vibe that the number 1 concern in this city is getting a good seat at some early bird special restaurant. I like Gilbert though. Gilbert's a really nice Arizona town. I'm not a big desert person, but Gilbert's a nice place to live, and they got a really cool water tower in town. 69.7% of Gilbert, Arizona's residents are identified as white. Number 6, Portland, Oregon. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised at this one. I knew they'd be close. I didn't think Portland would make it into the top 10 for the whitest cities in the United States. Portland, Maine, 100%, but they're really not big enough. That's one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning. We are only including the top 100 most populated cities. So I'm sure you could find some little towns in Vermont that are rocking a 90%, but yeah, we're looking at bigger cities. If you know the history of Oregon, this probably won't surprise you because they've got kind of a racist past. I mean, they had things in their constitution on it only being a white state. That's true. Oregon began as a whites-only state through a series of black exclusionary laws that were designed to discourage black Americans from living here. I mean, in 1859, they put a thing in the Constitution that outlawed blacks from owning property. Now, that's the whole state of Oregon, and we're focusing on cities, but Portland is Oregon Oregon's largest city. Those things obviously have been taken out of Oregon's constitution, but that definitely slowed the migration of non-white people into Oregon. These days, about 70.5% of Portland, Oregon's population is identified as white. Number 5, Madison, Wisconsin. This one is not a surprise at all. I guess the only surprise for me as someone who's been here several times is they're not higher on the list. I was doing a video on Milwaukee, Wisconsin a few years back, and I came across one guy's video he's an African American guy, and he said, if you're moving to Wisconsin and you're black, you just go to Milwaukee, no place else. And he was joking, he's all, them's the rules. I thought that was pretty funny. But in the early days of settlers to the Madison area, it was Germans, Dutch, Swiss, a lot of Irish, and Scandinavian immigrants. These days, 73.9% of Madison, Wisconsin's population is identified as white. Number 4, Lincoln, Nebraska. Yes, here we are with Nebraska again, and their big city of Lincoln. And when I say big city, I'm joking. Their population is under 300,000. Their whole metro area is only 342,000. So for Nebraska, that's a big city. For California, that's a town. Lincoln's a pretty interesting city that just kind of sprung up in the prairie. It's not near a major river. The Salt Creek runs through town, but it wasn't really close to the Platte River or the Missouri River. I mean, it's an hour drive from Lincoln to the Missouri River, but back in the day, that was a full day's travel. But Lincoln is definitely an interesting place, especially when you consider it's the state capital. If you look at the history of Nebraska, when it was the Nebraska Territory, Omaha was the capital then, and it probably should have stayed the capital when you consider the rivers and all that other good stuff. In the early 20th century, Volga German immigrants from Russia began showing up in this area, and that's when it started to really grow. These days, 80% of Lincoln, Nebraska's residents are considered white. Number 3, Scottsdale, Arizona. Again, not surprised. Scottsdale is just north of Gilbert, Arizona in the Phoenix metro area, and it shares a lot of the same features that Gilbert shares, including elderly people in knee socks, golf carts looking for a good early bird special. 80.3% of Scottsdale, Arizona's residents are identified as white. Number 2, Spokane, Washington. Now, whenever I do these videos, people always got to bring up race and stuff like that. And oh, look, there's no crime rate in these cities and they're white. We're going to hear all that stuff. It's going to be in the comment section below. It's ridiculous. But here's Spokane, Washington. They are extremely white and they have a very high crime rate. There's a reason the locals call this place Spokompton. The only thing Spokane, Washington and Compton, California have in common is a crime rate. Pretty high one. And no, Compton is not nearly as bad as it was in the 1990s. It still ain't good. If you don't know where Spokane is, it is on the eastern side of Washington state, not too far from the Idaho border. The first people to live in the area were the Spokane tribe, which the city is named after, obviously. In their language, that actually meant children of the sun. But they were living a good life here till explorers showed up and a fur trading outpost was set up, and Spokane grew out of that. These days, 81.4% of Spokane's residents are identified as white. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. We'd love it if you went over and subscribed. Watch some videos, leave some comments. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Boise, Idaho. Yeah, I could see this one easily. Actually, I'm shocked more Idaho cities aren't on this list. They call Canada the Great White North, and I'm surprised Idaho's never tried to steal that nickname. But Boise, Idaho, and by the way, that's how you pronounce it, Boise, not Boise, which I did at the beginning. Who left the comment? Come on. That, by the way, out of all the things you could call a place or mispronounce a city, calling Boise, seems to be the one that I get the most complaints about. That and Mississippi. Boise was one of the more popular cities to move to for I'd say about a good decade. In recent years, it's slipped out of the top 10, but it's still going strong. I mean, it's probably 14th or 15th. A lot of people are moving up there, and a lot of Californians have moved up there in the last decade or two. And this drives those people crazy. Interesting fact about Idaho, an odd amount of people don't realize that Idaho actually touches Nevada. And yes, Nevada touches Oregon as well. That was one of those Jay Leno questions. He used to go out called jaywalking, ask people questions. Asked a bunch of people to name the states that border Idaho. And they'd always get like Oregon and Washington and maybe Montana right, but they could never get Utah, Nevada, Wyoming. But Boise, Idaho is closer to the Nevada border than it is to the Washington border. Boise is another city, town at the time that sprung up because of the fur trading business. These days, 82.7% of Boise's population is identified as white. Now, we were talking about that Hispanic white too. If you included that, it would be almost 90%, 89.5%. But the white only thing, 82.7%. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.